Hi, everybody. Captain Lou here from the Captain Lou Extravaganza, which airs live every Tuesday night from 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern Time on the 12-ounce Sports Network. With the breaking news tonight that Major League Baseball, the Players Union, has come back with an 89-game proposal and 100% prorated salaries. And I think all of us know what's going to end up with that, and that's not going to happen. Those are double goose eggs right there. I think you're going to end up seeing about a 60-game schedule. That'll be the only compromise I think the owners will make with a 100% prorated salary.
Welcome to this episode of The Media's Input. I am your host, James A. Paxson. To check out previous interviews and this interview, go to the YouTube channel, James Paxson. My last interview was with Rena Laverty, Metro Detroit photographer. She took pictures for the Red Wings years ago and was basically at Joe Louis Arena for every home game. You can check out that interview at the YouTube channel, James Paxson. My guest today is the Aquinas hockey broadcaster. You can catch him Tuesday nights from 8 to 10 on 12-ounce Sports Network. Lou Gamelin. Lou, how are we doing, sir?
James, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, considering with the coronavirus and everything going on, hopefully things are getting better. And I think with the way things are going, things are going to get better. And slowly but surely, we'll get back to normal anytime soon.
I tend to agree. Things are starting to open up a little bit. You see some of the high school practices starting out, the non-contact ones, throwing the ball around and whatnot. And that's a welcome sight after what we've been through the last 2 to 3 months. Who would have thought that we'd ever be in this kind of a situation? So we're taking baby steps, but it looks like things are starting to come together.
Do you think there's anything virus-related that has changed sports forever now? For the time being, for the next 50, 100 years, do you think something virus-related has changed it to where not only this year things won't go back to normal, but for the rest of time?
Boy, that's so hard to say. I mean, I think for the next couple of years, you'll see attendance down at the ballparks because people are going to really think twice about wanting to sit like at Michigan or Michigan State going in with 100,000 people or 75,000 people. They're going to think twice about that, I think, once they get the green light to do that. As far as the athletes, I don't know. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, if we ever have baseball this year, there's no spitting and whatnot. And, the high fives, I think in a couple of years, if we get if we get some type of vaccine and we get it figured out, I think after 2 to 3 years, we'll be pretty close to normal. I got a feeling.
I think so too, but I do think the one thing that's kind of changed forever is recruiting. I think a lot more people are not going to send scouts out to go see somebody. It's going to be over the camera or conversations online with the person, and recruiting will now be done at home. You kind of saw it with the NFL draft where it seemed like everything was going just as smoothly as everyone gaining up in Las Vegas just at home.
I tend to agree with that. That's a great point, James. The ACHA coaches that I've talked to since the pandemic and everything shut down, that's the first thing. A lot of them have had to learn how to use Zoom and how to do the video conferencing and talking to parents and kids and watching a lot more film. I agree with you. That's going to be a game changer. And I think, I don't know if it's a bad thing. I think it could be in the long run will save universities some money, with the traveling budgets that some of these coaches are on. So, I mean, that could be a good thing.
Well, I just look at it also as instead of being a hockey team in Michigan, who you're probably going to get people in Michigan and maybe a couple other out-of-staters, you could get the whole country if you start recruiting online like this. And maybe you could convince someone who lives in the Northwest or who lives in Massachusetts or someone who doesn't live in Michigan to come to play hockey here.
I think you're right, and the coaches are going to have to be a little better salespeople too, because the one drawback is they're not going to be able to get them to the arena or the rink or the football field to see the facilities. They won't be quite as they can't make the big booming presentation that way. But I think I agree with you for the most part. I think it's going to be a game changer, and I think it could be a good thing.
So talk to me about your education or professional history and how you became a hockey broadcaster and someone who does your show on 12-ounce Sports Network.
Well, I graduated from Central back in 1988 in December with a degree in broadcasting. And I worked in Holland for a year in Michigan. And then moved back up to my hometown in the UP in Munising. I was a general manager of a very small radio station for a couple of years. And I did everything from commercial writing to janitor to doing the play-by-play. And that's my first love is sports. It always has been. Always been a hockey fan. Listened to the Red Wings, listened to the Montreal Canadiens with my grandfather back in the 70s, in French, no less. And that's kind of where I got hooked onto that language. And always wanted to do the hockey broadcasting. Unfortunately, there weren't that many opportunities back then. That was before the advent of the internet. And so I was in broadcasting until the early 90s and took a break from it. And then when Michigan Sports Radio started doing internet broadcasting play-by-play, I started doing football with them about 11 or 12 years ago, and started and wanted to do hockey, my whole life, and had an opportunity with Aquinas and got in with them about 6 years ago, I believe it was. And it's just expanded from then. We started out just doing games over the phone, and then a year later we got the video hookup with it. And they've got a very, very nice network that they use with Aquinas, and it's given me an opportunity to do games with them home and away. And then again with that also getting hooked up with the ACHA, which has been just an absolute blast doing the national tournaments.
Talk about Aquinas for a little bit. Some of the best moments you ever had covering them, some of the national championship years or the championship years where you remember covering those games and some of the biggest games you ever did.
Well, I was very lucky to do their 2016 national championship run where they finished runner-up to Oakland. Sean Bednard, a fellow Central Michigan grad, and I did the championship game. And a quick story on that is I came down with the flu and had the flu for the championship game. And I told them, I said, there's no way I'm missing this. So they lost, but the next year going to Columbus when the ACHA in 2017 came together with the NHL with them getting host cities. So the Columbus Blue Jackets hosted it for a couple of years in 17 and 18. And going down there and watching Aquinas win the national championship, being on the call for that game was probably one of my favorite moments. They played a Calvin team that they had kind of had some struggles with over the years and beat them in the championship game. And you could have it was standing room only down in Columbus at their practice facility. The Nationwide Arena, we didn't go in there, but right next to it, right across the corridor, they have about a 2,000 seat practice arena, and it was full. And we're talking with Bob Kaiser, who does the Griffins. His son played on the Saints. He told me, he said we could have probably got 8,000 people for that game at Van Andel. And so it was exciting. That's probably the highlight. Then they went NAIA the following year and won a national tournament bid in 18 down there. The one year that the NAIA, or one of the 2 years the NAIA had their own hockey league. And then in 19, they went to Dallas when the national tournament switched to Dallas, which was, an absolute blast too. They moved up to Division II and made it to the national tournament. Didn't make it out of the pool play, but it was exciting because they played very well. And this year they were heading back to Dallas before the pandemic. And ironically enough, their first game this year down in Division, they bumped up to D1, would have been against Calvin. So that would have been quite the game there. But unfortunately, they didn't get to play. But those are probably the highlights, and getting to grow with the senior class that just graduated, getting to know them real well and seeing them, get their degrees and just, tell me how much fun they've had. And that's really was a highlight for me.
What are you looking forward to in this next year when it comes to Aquinas hockey? Well,
they've got a good, solid team coming back. They were very young. They only graduated 3 kids. They've got some solid goaltending. Their defense is going to be solid all around. I think they're going to be very good. They finished ranked 17th in the country. But what I'm really looking forward to with them is they play all their 34 games this year are going to be pretty much in the Michigan area. And there is such a good core of teams in Division I in the ACHA. You've got Calvin, you've got U of M Dearborn, who's always in the national tournament, Rochester, just Adrian College, all different levels in hockey. In the ACHA, Adrian's a powerhouse. Davenport, Grand Valley's going to be D1. So that's what I'm looking forward to, getting a chance to watch them grow along with these other teams. And I think the future is bright for them. They've got a solid recruiting class coming in. They recruited another goaltender from Sweden, I believe. So it's going to be fun to watch them. And I think they really have a solid shot at getting to the Nationals, which is going to be just outside of Boston next March.
With all of your hockey experience and all the arenas you've been to, what is the best arena to broadcast a game at?
Well, I would have to say the Nationwide Arena, the practice rink was fun. Again, it was packed to the gills. I had a chance to do a game at Van Andel, and I mean that was a treat for me. Those, as far as doing a game, that was probably be my favorite as far as the arenas go. The one that we did it in Dallas and Plano, it was nice. It was very, but unfortunately, if there's one drawback of doing a college tournament like that in Dallas, it's not the hockey hotbed that Michigan or Minnesota or Ohio even, or like what Boston. I got a feeling that what Boston's going to be. It was nice, but there was a lot of empty seats, and it was kind of cavernous, if you will. So, but I mean, the hockey was good, but it just, you just felt, a little out of place there. So I'd have to go back to the Columbus area because all the facilities were very nice. All the different arenas that they used. And that's, and again, with Aquinas winning the national championship, that's always going to hold a special place in my heart because it was, again, a lot of fun.
So I assume you saw that about a week ago, Max Kellerman, who is a co-host on First Take, decided to make a comment that made a lot of hockey people angry, but a lot of people who don't like hockey kind of agreed with him that nobody really cares about the NHL in the United States. Do you agree with him? Do you think he's insane? Do you think he has any sort of point whatsoever?
Well, I think Max Kellerman said a little bit of that for clicks and for views. I know he's not, and that's the problem sometimes with ESPN. They don't have hockey on their network. Now, I know they have on ESPN Plus, I think they do have a few games, but I think he did that kind of for show. Yeah, he's a Southern California guy that hockey's not as big down there. And yeah, he's saying that I'm not a big fan of his. I never really have been. I know some of that stuff he does with Stephen A is kind of staged, but it upset me a little bit when I first saw it. And I lost any respect I had for him. I lost because I think he just did it to rile us hockey fans and, that follow the game and broadcasting, rile us up a little bit. But I just, I take what he says with a grain of salt sometimes. I mean, his sport, I think maybe boxing, and I think, maybe he should concentrate on that. But again, he says some outrageous stuff on that show that I think sometimes he does for effect. So I don't really take him that serious.
While I've followed you on 12 Ounce and you do your hockey broadcasting, you cover a lot of different sports. Mm-hmm. How are you able to keep all that organized and so you don't get anything mixed up? While you're talking about the NFL, you don't think of another sport, or while you're talking about the baseball and all the player association approval plans this week, you don't have another name in your head to get mixed up.
Well, it's just repetition, the main thing, and write a lot of notes down. And I try to try to keep it as segmented as possible. That's the one thing I learned a long time ago. Before I went to Central, I had a job in high school. I worked in Munising at a radio station. And my boss, he told me two things. He said, always be organized and always look professional. And it's funny because when we went to do high school basketball games, he would wear a suit and tie. Now, I know that's, my gosh, 40 years ago now, but I always remember that because I tend to do that with my games, high school football and Aquinas hockey. especially hockey, because they're all dressed to the nines. I think that's the one sport left besides maybe basketball where they do that. Now that's kind of a favorite thing of mine to do. But the other thing is to stay organized with what you're talking about. And again, at Central, when I went to school there, one of my professors said the same thing. He said, you got to look believable to be believable, is what he used to say. And so write everything down. And so that's what I try to do. And, just stay organized, and to be believable, you got to look believable. So I always remember that. Dr. Henderson told me that.
With the state of Detroit sports right now, we're not exactly in a celebration mood between the Lions, Tigers, Wings, and Pistons. Who do you think is the front runner as probably the best team in Detroit right now, or the team you think you have the most hope in?
Wow, right now, as crazy as it sounds, I honestly think it's the Lions. I think they had a decent draft. They've got that terrible word, that P word, potential, to be. They could win 10 games in that division. I honestly think so. When I did my preview on my show right after the draft, it was funny as I had the Lions, the Packers, and the Vikings all at 9-7 with the potential to win 10 or 11. I look at the Lions' schedule as I do every year, and if they can get through the first part 3-3, I think the end is the end of their schedule is pretty solid. I love the pickups they got, the first two picks. I think Swift is going to be a very good running back. And Stafford to me is underrated. He was injured last year before he had a chance to win, before he could really do some damage. And it's because the other teams, the Pistons, right now, I don't see their direction. They've got a lot of cap space taken up with their 2 or 3 biggest stars. The Red Wings are still in a rebuild. They're probably 3 to 4 years away from being in a contender in the playoffs. They could sneak in, but they're nowhere near the Bostons or the Torontos or Washington Capitals or whatnot. And the Tigers, I don't know. I mean, the one thing with the Tigers, there's always a caveat, is back in 2006 when they won the World Series, went to the World Series, the year before, they lost 90 games. And so if you can get some solid pitching once their youngsters come up, they could turn around and win 85 to 90 games. But I still think they're at least 2 to 3 years away.
Every sport, it's hard to win the championship. But out of the 4 sports, what do you think is the easiest to win the championship?
Wow. I'd have to – this might sound crazy. Football to me is the easiest, except for the Lions. The Stanley Cup playoffs to me are they're the toughest tournament, in my opinion. Maybe baseball might be the easiest. Between baseball and football, basketball again's a grind too. Hockey's a grind. You got to win so many series. Hockey, you get a hot goaltender, that's one thing, but you've got to win. You've got to have more of a complete game, I believe, defensively too. It ratchets up. Baseball, if you can get some hot pitching, if your starters are hot, you've got a shot. But I think football to me is easier because once you get in the playoffs, you get one of the top 2 seeds. You get a bye, and then you have to win a couple of games to get to the Super Bowl. So I'd go with football, like I said, unless you're a Lions fan, which it's been 61 years or whatever, 63. So
not in my lifetime.
No.
Actually, in my lifetime, I've never seen them win a playoff game.
I saw them win the Lions game in 91, and boy, you thought that they were really they had the makings to make a run, and they actually weren't bad. They just, they lost that home game in 94, I think it was, to the Packers on that Hail Mary pass, and then they would get in, but then they can never win that first playoff game. So,
yeah, unfortunately, I think Barry Sanders, being a Lion, has done a lot to his reputation and his legacy, because if Barry Sanders was on most other teams, I think he'd have way better stats.
Oh, I agree. And back in the 90s, I still say what ran him out of town too was Bobby Ross. And when he came in, I know, and everybody's going to scoff at this, they had Scott Mitchell, who threw for 4,000 yards. He had 2 bad games, and he pulled them. And he put in Charlie Batch. Well, then Charlie Batch iced Herman Moore, they're one of the top receivers in the game. And then they instilled a fullback. Now, Corey Schlesinger, God bless him, he's a good football player, good pro. But you don't put a fullback in the backfield with Barry Sanders. And Barry Sanders saw that there was nothing there. They were going nowhere fast. And I don't blame him. I wasn't happy with the way he retired 2 days before training camp. But, I understand why he did. And to your point, James, I think you're right. If he would have been a Cowboy or a Packer or whoever, he would have had probably 20,000 yards.
Well, you said Cowboy, because most of the time when anybody talks about Barry Sanders, they say Emmitt Smith. So as much as I'd like to say who's better, I think a lot of that depends on the team. Emmitt Smith, I don't want to take anything away from him. I think he's probably top 3 of the best running backs of all time. You put him on the Lions, what does his stats look like?
I think he'd be just like Barry Sanders, if not worse, because Barry didn't have the blocking that Emmitt had. And I think Emmitt was more of a downhill runner. And again, I'm like with you. You can't take anything away from him. The guy won 3 Super Bowls, and he's the leading rusher. But I think you're right. I think he might have had 13,000 yards, and he wouldn't have had the accolades that he's got now. And he was a byproduct of being in a very solid program with some really good coaches.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on the system that you're in. So
100% agree.
In a different world, I think Barry would have been better. But, of course, he was still amazing with the Lions team that he had.
Oh, he sure was. And he made a lot of – he had a share of negative runs, but he made a lot of big runs out of nothing. And you're right, he was such a weapon. And, if they would have just, ifs and buts, if they would have had decent line blocking for him and, the defense was okay, and that just it was a combination of things, and he finally just had enough.
Speaking of him and great Detroit athletes, I don't know if you were able to watch The Last Dancer live, but it was a great documentary. But I'd say one of the main problems if you're from Michigan or a Detroit Pistons fan is that it had a lot of Isaiah Thomas slander in there. And I don't know if it's proven fact or not, but do you think that Jordan kept Isaiah out of the Dream Team on purpose? And do you think Isaiah's reputation has kind of been slandered because of that documentary?
I think both of you are correct. He says he didn't do it. There was the tape that was leaked out that when he was doing the interview, I can't remember who it was with, for a book that he said he talked to Rod Thorne, and he told him that if Isaiah's on the team, then I'm not going to be. And then they went to Chuck Daly, and I believe that he did say that. I don't believe what he said in the documentary. I watched all those episodes. I thought it was a great show. I really enjoyed it. I didn't agree with them. In my opinion, there not only was that, and I don't think the handshake really had as much to do with it. I think a lot of it was, it had something to do with it, but let's face it, they beat the crap out of Chicago physically and mentally for 4 years before they were able to solve him. And I honestly think that, they say that he's in Isaiah's head. I think the tables are the exact opposite, because that's all he talks about is Isaiah. He called him what he called him, and Isaiah had his number. And the competitor that Michael Jordan is, he hates to lose at anything. And I think that gnaws at him that Isaiah had a winning record against him. He won more, like 4 series out of 5 against him. And and the other guys didn't like him either because their play was borderline dirty, but that's how you played it 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And, I think that had a lot to do with it. I think Isaiah gets a bum rap on that. Now, he's done some things after that, like with ruining the Continental Basketball Association and his stuff with the Knicks. But as far as that goes, I think he gets a bum rap for some of that because, he wasn't the only one that played like that. And, growing up in the 80s watching basketball like that, that's how you play.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Now switching sports, your love is hockey. You broadcast hockey. The NHL is going to finish out their season, and it's going to look a little different. But with the Stanley Cup playoffs, do you have a dark horse team in mind that isn't one of the top teams that could maybe win it all?
Well, gosh, I don't know if I've really got a dark horse team. I'm not the only. I got to tell you, the only team that I'm worried. There's two teams. Maybe a dark horse would be out west. Would be Colorado. I like their goaltending, and I think they're young and they're quick. The East, I'll tell you, I like that. The series that I'm really looking forward to watching is the play-in series is going to be Toronto and Columbus. Tortorella always has his team up in the opening round of the playoffs. Watch out for Carolina. Montreal might surprise Carolina. If Carey Price can get hot, then you know what, that could be a zinger right there. But gosh, that would be the closest thing to a dark horse. Toronto as an 8 seed is scary. As much talent as they have, and it seems like they underachieve. One of these years they're going to break out. So maybe if you can call them a dark horse as an 8 seed, if they can put it all together, they could be scary. But again, they still have to get past Columbus. That would be my only other dark horse. Maybe the New York Rangers. Keep an eye out for them. I think that they've got some young talent, and I think they could be pretty good too.
So next year for the Red Wings, Blashill is back. Now, do you think that was a smart move or a stupid move?
I'm 50-50 on it. I don't mean to sound wishy-washy. I was kind of surprised, but I'm not. Something tells me, and again, this is just a guess, that Steve Yzerman may have had some talks with Gerard Gallant or Lane Lambert, I think, was his buddy and with the Wings, his first roommate, I think. I know there was some talk that he might be interested in it. And maybe Gallant wasn't ready to come to Detroit. Maybe he saw the roster and said, there's still a ways out. Blashill, to me, was dealt a bad hand. I think he got dealt a lot of bad contracts, and I think that he was up against the wall a couple of times with the youngsters coming in. Some of the things, his line changes and stuff that he does, I don't understand. But, I think I would have liked to seen fresh blood in there. I just, I don't see him leading Detroit back to the Stanley Cup, and that's the thing. So that's something that tells me that maybe they're just waiting for some of the younger guys to come up, Sider and some of the other ones that they've drafted early, Rasmussen, and I don't know, once they get there, maybe he'll get a shot, but I think he's still right now just a stopgap.
How do you feel about Dylan Larkin, the captain? Or do you think he's not going to be a great captain in an NHL team, or do you think he's going to flourish and do amazing?
I think I like it. He's, hometown boy, went to Michigan and all that. I think it's a good choice. I like it. I think he's got a lot of potential. It's just right now they're a bad team. They're not very good. It's been a long time since we've said that about a Red Wings team. It's been 37 years since they used to have to give a car away at a Red Wings game to get people to go back in the early part of the early Joe Louis days. So, it's so new territory, James, with the Red Wings. They've been so good for so long, and now they've hit this spell where they're rebuilding, and they've hit rock bottom. And now there's nowhere to go but up, and I think that they can I like that they gave him the captaincy. I think he can be with Detroit for a while. Does he have to step up his game a little bit? I think so, but I think the potential is there for him to be an 80 to 100-point scorer in the National Hockey League, and I think if he can do that, then he'll be playing for 10 to 12 more years.
So nobody's going to hear from you for hockey or any football for a while, but they can hear and see your show 8 to 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. What are you hoping to accomplish with that? What are you hoping listeners and viewers experience when they come to your show?
Well, I just like them to be entertained first and foremost. My goal is to try to get some guests that are, some more well-known guests. That's everybody's goal when they do a show like this. Just want them to stay entertained, especially in these times right now. Our social atmosphere in our country right now is tough. With the coronavirus, it's gotten people down there. It's a hard time right now for everybody. Something that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And my goal is, again, to entertain people, to make them laugh a little bit, but to inform them. I mean, it was kind of cool because I had an old professional wrestler he was very popular 35 years ago, back when I was in college on about 3 weeks ago, and Nikita Koloff. And it was great to reminisce. I had a lot of people that sent me emails thanking me for having him on. I had Mick McCabe on Tuesday night from the Free Press. He just finished 50 years covering high school sports. And to hear the stories of who he's covered and where, the guy, names that you forgot that went to high school in Michigan, like Pat Shermer and Antonio Gates, and, playing football and, things like that. And just trying to I want to get people on that can tell stories, historical stuff during the summer right now. Just, basketball back in the 70s and 80s, baseball back, in the 60s and 70s, that type of thing. It's getting Aquinas as director of hockey operations. He's our color commentator, Mark Van Vliet on. He played college hockey back in the 70s and he was an emergency goalie for the Grand Rapids IHL team, which is comparable now to their AHL team. They would call him up, and he never played, but the stories he would tell back in the 70s, just stuff out of Slapshot. It's cool to hear those stories, and that's the kind of thing that I want to accomplish, and it gives me a lot of joy in doing that, and it's a lot of fun. It's a labor of love. I've always liked doing it, and I'm fortunate enough now that I can do it, and I can do it as a hobby and maybe grow it into something else when, I want to give up my real job.
What can people hear on Tuesday coming up?
Well, next Tuesday, we're going to have an interview with the new commissioner of the ACHA Division III, Derek Connor. And also we're going to try to I've got a couple of names out in the works, baseball, because, some former major leaguers working on. And also we're going to get some more talk on hockey. I'm trying to effort another play-by-play guy, because it was announced today that they're going to start training camp in the NHL on July 10th. And so we're going to focus on that and talk a little basketball with the NBA on the 31st. That's normally not what I talk about. Mostly for me, it's football and hockey on my show. When the tournament time comes around for college basketball, we'll cover that, the NBA and their playoffs, and then Major League Baseball in the fall and in the late summer. But unfortunately, with no sports, we've had to lean on those other sports. And so I'm going to try to get some perspective I've got a couple of friends that are in the business in California that I've been trying to pin down to come on and talk NBA. And we're going to focus on those three sports right now: hockey, baseball, and basketball, because, that's what's going to get us through the summer, James. Hopefully baseball will. You and I talked before we came on that it's iffy at best right now. And, you can only beg and plead, rant on your show so many times for them to get together in a room and just say, hey, let's figure this out. But that's kind of what we're looking for next Tuesday.
All right. Thank you very much, Lou. To check out this interview and previous interviews, go to the YouTube channel, James Paxson. And as always, thank you very much to Mr. Lou Gamelin.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.